Hey Joe, I wanted to ask you about the Music.City bridges and tell me about how that started and where it's going.
So it really started with one of those 52, 53 gold Les Pauls.
Yeah.
With the wrap over the trapeze with the wrap under where the bar is over the strings. Um, Keith Urban had one of those where he loved the sound of it, but didn't like the fact he couldn't get his hands down on the string.
Right.
And he asked me if there was anything we could do. One day I just sort of whittled out, because I've got a machine shop.
Right.
I whittled out this tailpiece that was essentially like a wrap over where the strings would come through it. He'd still use the trapeze, but it got it down low enough and he could put his hands on the strings. And I made this thing. It was brass. I didn't even play it. And I said, please don't show it to anybody, because I don't want to get those. I don't want to make a bunch of these.
Right.
And that lasted a week, and then phone calls.
So you had to make a bunch.
So we made 50 of them. Then we made another 200 of them. And I got, we made them in house, and I got advanced plating to plate them, and it was a product. And that was kind of the start of it. And then Tom Bukovac, who, the homeschooling guy,
Session man.
incredible session guy, incredible guitar player, came in one day, and he was tired of the next version of the Gibson tailpiece that they made starting in about 53 and ran through the early 60s, which was on the juniors and the specialists that had that severe angle, which made the swing sitar a little bit more, and it had a number of problems. And so we sat down and designed one that kicked the treble side back. It's interesting, Gibson on the acoustics and the electrics for that period of about 10 years moved the saddle so that the bass side was intonated, but the treble side was way flat. And so we made this tailpiece. We ended up calling it Bigfoot. And that was really popular. It basically pushed the treble side back down, and it'd go more across, so the strings weren't coming across it. They weren't coming across a saddle at a broader angle. And that was successful, and so it just became. We just started taking things that people asked us about or wanted, and put them into production.
Yeah.
So we weren't making stuff one or two at a time. We were making hundreds at a time, or a few thousand of them at a time. So we went around the shop and just started pulling things that nobody else was doing. We didn't want to make another another traditional Stratocaster vibrato. We wanted to make something that was a blue water product. Of course, it turns out that the moment you make something that nobody's ever made before, people pile on and start copying it. But that's the way they always do.
That's great. And you'll even make one now that's for modern.
Yeah.
I've heard one of those on my S3 Juniors.
You like it?
Love it.
Oh, the Savvy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's intonated.
Yes.
We worked a lot. Interestingly, when we were working on both the intonation line and the alloys, we had to blindfold these guys we had testing it, and I blindfolded Bukovac, and I had Robin Ford and Vince Gill, these people testing this, and to the extent that they could see.
You sure they're qualified?
That's the luxury. That's the luxury of having these people.
Pretty good.
Is that you're asking the pickiest people with the most experience. It's not that it's so and so. It's that they're, when one of those guys comes in and says, "Man, I just played this really incredible guitar." It's a really incredible guitar.
Yeah.
So, we found that we had to blindfold them. I have these pictures of Bukovac and a couple other guys who would blindfold on playing guitar. We'd put a bridge on, they'd play it, and then we'd quickly change the bridge out. And these are guys that have good enough musical memory that they can go back and play the exact twin to a solo they just put down on the first pass. They can play the harmony part to it, just remembering it. They're very good at remembering tone and sound and all that stuff. So we would quickly change this out. And I have these pictures. They look like hostages. Looks like some sort of war hostage. A guy with a blindfold on playing guitar. And when we blindfolded them, they would tend to pick the exact same thing over and over again because that's it. You know, we try. I'm from Missouri. It's like you got to prove
Central. Yeah.
But you know, you got to prove it to me. So we would make 4 bridges or 6 and put numbers on them and put them on at random. And it's like, how about that one? Yeah. How about that one? How about that one? That's the one. And then we would mix them up and run them through again. And they would reliably pick out the one that they liked, the intonation line and the alloy line on over and over again blindfolded. But if they could see, they 100% picked the original vintage one, which is what we were trying to replace in the first place. Because when it came down to it, they didn't like the intonation line on it. They didn't like the curve or whatever that. So there's a lot of testing went into it.
And then you have the telly string tree as well.
Yeah.
That's what for the G string.
Yeah, a little 3-string tree. I always called it the triple tree. When I first made my guitars in the early '80s, I made this one that was the triplet tree that was 3 strings that used ball ends as rollers on a little rod, and for 3 strings. And I did it for years, and then I just stopped doing it. I don't know, 5 years ago or something, somebody came in. Jim Oland is a guy I'm in Rio who had one of those, came in and said, why don't you do that anymore? Why don't you do that little 3-way thing? So we did. Now, in all fairness, Reverend also makes a really nice little 3-string thing. They call them triplet tree. And theirs is just the rod. But then, you know, I might have predated them by 20 years, but I love the one they make because I think it's very cool. But ours looks like a Fender. It looks just like a Fender traditional string tree, except it's got one more holder for the G string. And what's cool about it is if it's like E, B, G, it has more pull on the G side, which means that it sits up a little higher for the G, which is what the G means.
Yeah.
The G doesn't need to be as deep as the high E. So luck made it work out perfectly. And it just looks like a regular, just like a little regular Fender string tree, except that you don't have to put a second string tree in the headstock. You're not drilling an extra hole, and you're pulling down the G, which is the other one that needs it.
And there's rumors you're doing a Gretsch roller.
How do you know this? You have spies somewhere.
I don't, but I think old Tommy Boy
Oh, he talked about it?
it.
Yeah, it's very cool. And again, there's something he came in complaining about the fact that the Gretsch space control bridge
Yes.
wasn't intonated, so we have this little lightning bolt shaped one, but it takes rollers and so you can roll the space out where you want, but it's intonated. It's pretty cool. We're just finishing. You know, when you make something like that, you go through 10 to 40 different prototypes trying to get the knurling just right, trying to get the string groove just right. So I think we finally got all that happening. It should be ready either this week or next week.
Great. It's really for you. We need any plans for Molitas or the other incredible Gretsch bridges all on my guitars.
Do you think there's a world for a Molita that's different anyway?
Always, you know, you're the scientist. I'm from Irving, Texas. So the Molitas will always were space age looking to me. They look way more advanced than anything in that era. But you know, I just deal with them.
They're very adjustable though.
Yeah, yes. So to me, it's kind of part of on vintage Gretches. Their Achilles heel is also their charm, to a degree. So I'm certain there's Gretsch guys that will probably want if you find them for that, but
We have a telly saddle.
It's a niche market for sure.
We've got a telly saddle coming out that I think solves a lot of the problems. You know, we don't tend to put out just another intonated telly saddle we kind of sit and look at something and go, what do we hate about these things, or
Right.
what's the problem with them? And if there's no problem, we go,
What would you want on your guitar?
what is it that we can do that other people haven't done? So we have a telesaddle that really lets you set the string spacing accurately, but it's not fancier, it's not complicated, and it's very vintage sounding and very vintage looking. It just has some cool things about it. That should be out in a couple months. We'll certainly send you some of those.
Yeah. All right. Also, want to change the tables. What's the coolest repair for a unique instrument you've ever got to lay your hands on that you didn't expect to get to be a part of?
What historic instruments?
Sure.
Oh, certainly. Peter Green's Les Paul, which we refretted, Cesar.
Yeah.
He's head of Gibson. He brought that
Yeah.
in. Hammond was that. We refretted that. We've had some really cool historical instruments. Some of which, when Garcia's Wolf was out on tour, Warren Haynes was playing it. This was a secret, except everybody else talked about it. Call Palm talked about it. But they were out on tour. He was doing symphonies with it, playing Grateful Dead stuff, and it fell over and the headstock broke off. And they needed it. And it's an incredibly beautifully made guitar.
Right.
It's beautiful. The workmanship that Danny, or whatever his name was, put into that, it was just astounding. And of course, it had great historical use. It was a summer NAMM. I was at the D'Addario party, and Warren called me up and said, I got good news and bad news. How would you like to do something with the work on the Wolf? I said, that'd be cool. He said, well, the headstock broke off. I was like, yeah. He said, worse than that, I need it tomorrow night. What can you do about this? And so they brought it in the morning, and we glued it up and tried to do the touch up so that it looked like nothing had ever happened to it, which in that case wasn't. It turned out to not be incredibly difficult. But things like that happen where for me, it's working on the historical instruments that changed music when I was growing up.
Right.
That seems to be the stuff I really like.
I don't know if I asked you one time, somebody that worked at Fender who had worked for Grover had told me about how many vintage Strats he had put Floyd Rose.
Yeah.
You told me about Takamine preamps.
Oh yeah.
So you tell the story about vintage Martins. So.
Oh, you mean the Takamine, the vintage Martin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was the pickup systems weren't as advanced as they are now. So all the country players wanted the Takamine preamp.
The Takamine pickup, particularly the one with the original brown 3-slider
Right.
plastic, that's a great sounding pickup. And to this day, in a live situation, that's probably the best house sound you're going to get in front of the band. Not in a duo playing finger picking stuff, but if there's a drummer and everything else, and you want something to sound like a guitar on top of all that stuff, that's probably still the best sounding pickup.
You just cut a hole at the top of the desk Martins and drop them in.
Well, yeah, if you're well, hopefully you're not doing it to a vintage Martin. But the first person who had this idea was Ricky Skaggs.
Yeah.
Who has always had nice guitars. Ricky had a herringbone, 40s, I think late 30s, early 40s herringbone D28, and he came in. He had a couple of them. He said, "Man, could you put this in for me? I want this. I want Takamine pickup in there." I said, "Ricky, don't make me do that," because even early on, I realized that there were certain things you weren't supposed to do in guitars.
They were going to go up value that they hadn't exploded yet.
Well, they just deserved not to. It's partly value, but partly if you have the most perfect example of something. You don't. If you're dealing with Marilyn Monroe, you don't just
Right.
add a third eye or something. Even if she wants to be able to see, up here. So I said, Ricky, I don't really want, because at the time the idea was you put the pickup in, which meant you had to take the bridge off and cut a hole underneath the bridge.
Right.
But you also had this preamp that was this big that had to go through the side. And I said, Ricky, I don't feel like doing it. He goes, well, I'm going to do it. And I said, well, let somebody else do that. And he took it to another repair guy in Nashville who's not in the business anymore. So I can tell you, he did a terrible job.
Yeah.
He did a terrible job. And Ricky showed it to me, and I said, well, wow, that's not even good. And he said, well, it's your fault. And he was kidding, but he wasn't kidding.
Yeah.
I said, okay. It's my
Told
fault.
you he was gonna do it.
Yeah. And I said, well, okay. He said, well, I've got another guitar. I want two of them because I need a backup. Will you do the other one? Because I'm gonna get it done. And so the bridge part at least was covered up, and the bridge part, in a worst case scenario, you could reverse it all.
Right.
But the preamp you couldn't, and I wasn't going to put a preamp through the Brazilian rosewood side. And so I took the preamp. I mean, this is how good things come out of bad things.
Right.
Which is what Einstein said. He said every problem is an opportunity. Not that I'm comparing him to him, but I took the preamp and I moved it to the inside of the guitar. I stuck it to the neck block of the guitar with Velcro, and I pulled the volume slider out and mounted it to the inside of the sound hole. So you could get in there and operate the volume. You could use a pencil to change the tone, because you don't change the tone on every song.
Right.
And that way I didn't have to cut a hole inside the guitar. And that was the beginning of sound hole volume. And people saw that. And the ones that didn't want to do it because you had to buy a Takamine to get a Takamine preamp and pickup. You had to, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
You had to, it wasn't simple. Well, a few people could afford it. A lot of people couldn't.
Yeah.
So, but people would see that and they go, "Oh, I want volume. I want my volume on there. I don't want my Fishman or whatever." And so I started buying these slide pots from Fishman, putting them on the sound hole. We did 50, 100, 200 of them, and I was buying the slide pots from Fishman. And so I'd call up. I'd go, "Why don't you just make a preamp where the preamp's sitting inside the guitar and the volume's coming out to the sound hole and sits on the sound hole?" And it took them a few years to do it. Baggs did it right away. I showed it to Lloyd, and he did it right away with that little brown peanut-shaped thing. And so, and it's become kind of industry standard. But that absolutely came out of the shop as a way of dealing with something that it wasn't a good idea.
Solution to a problem.
Well, you asked about what guitar, one of those guitars that it was memorable. Dickie Betts had a gold top. It was one of the coolest, close up. It was a great iconic guitar. I think he got it from Dwayne, but I'm not sure. But it was a great gold top, the coolest looking, worn out, wonderful guitar. And I worked for him. I mean, he brought stuff into the shop. He was a really interesting cat. He was always very nice to me, except when, in the midst of all that Floyd Rose stuff, he came to me and he said, "Man, let's put a Floyd in my gold top." And I said, "Dickie, I can't do that. I'm just not, that's just the wrong thing to do with this guitar." And he got really pissed at me, and he wasn't somebody to hold back.
Yeah.
He gave me a talking to, and I said, "Well, okay, all right. Let me try something else." And I took a Bigsby, and I put, everywhere where something moved, I put a bearing.
Right.
So I took out those roller bearings at the end. I put real bearings in, so they had zero friction. And then I put bearings where the strings went over the rod. I took that roller tube off and put bearings, and they were flange bearings so that the strings wouldn't fall off. And we put all bearings on, and that thing. And we did not put a locking nut on, but I went through and made the nut. You can make a nut so it's very low friction.
Right.
And that guitar really stayed in tune, and he got to do the whole thing. And then few years later, he was tired of it. He brought it back in and said, "Let's get rid of this. Let's go back to what was original." I said, "No problem."
Yeah.
And I was
Like, look, you're welcome.
well. It took him a few more years, but he called me a few years after that and went, I just want to thank you for letting me
That's cool that he did that.
put that Floyd Rose in there. Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure it wasn't easy for him because he wasn't that guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, but you try to do what you think is best.
Try to do the right thing.
I mean, Brad Paisley had a 67 Paisley guitar, and by the time he got it, I'd already decided we weren't going to do anything before 68. Because to me, that's when the great Fenders, the second great era of Fenders comes to an end in 68. And, arguably there's something wonderful about 70s, but at the time I didn't see that. He brought me this Paisley. He said, "Would you put a Fender in it?" And I said, I tell people I'm not going to do this. He said, "Well, are their last name Paisley?" And I said, "No." And he said, "What would it take?" And I said, "I'll tell you what it'd take, Brad. You're going to promise me you'll earn it so that later," because this was in the beginning of his career.
Right.
Like he was still in Belmont. He got his record deal.
That's when he bought a Fawn AC30 from me. He didn't come to the guitar show.
Really?
Just got his advance from me.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, this was probably his advance money. And I said, just earn it so later when people go, you're a two-faced, lying, blah, blah, blah. I can go, "No, look, is your last name Paisley and did you earn it?" And he did, so I'd say he earned it.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But at a certain point,
Well, what a class guy, because most of the guys that played with him when he was a nobody are the people that still in Spain. So it just shows you what kind of place it is.
he's great. I mean, we're working on a project now, and he's been incredibly fun to work with.
Yeah.
And he's been incredibly fun to work with, and he's a great. He's turned out to be a great guitar finishing master. Mostly, he buys these worn, torn, totally messed up 50s tellies and turns them back into very, very, very good relic versions of early 50s tellies. And I introduced him to Nacho Banos.
Yeah.
And they've been they were trading little tips and stuff, and I think he helped Nacho, but Nacho helped him. They both do unbelievably good repro finish work. But yeah, they people who do one great thing tend to do another great thing. And so if you invest your time in somebody who's really working their butt off, they tend to pay it off. It tends to get paid off over and over.
Yeah. That's awesome. These are great stories.
Yeah. Well, that's the reward of. I mean, listen. All I ever wanted to do was hang out with musicians. I mean, I play obviously,
Right.
but nobody ever called me. I'm never going to be on one of those. I was not going to get to be in the quality of band that I would have loved to have been, but I've gotten to hang out with these people.
Yeah. Been part of the journey.
Been part of the journey. Worked for him. Have him call me up at 11 o'clock at night, man, or 1:30 in the morning. "I'm thinking of doing such and such. What do you think?" But first of all, don't call me at 1:30 in the morning. But while we're at it, and then I get off the phone, it's like, how bad is that? How bad is that to be able to be contributing to the world that I wanted to contribute to? Always.
But yeah.
This is exactly the position you guys are. You're making all these people happy in something that really means something to them.
Yeah, it's a privilege, and all the guitars are unique. They're organic material, and so it's amazing that you come across one that speaks to you. That this guitar came in. For this person, it's really going to suit them well, and that you call them and get the instrument to them, and then just like, I just used that record.
Mm-hmm.
It was perfect for what you said it was going to be. So it's a cool thing.
It inspires them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's That's the name of the game.
Well, thanks for coming, back up to the shop.
Well,
Safe travels back home.
Thanks as always. You guys are doing a great thing, and not only that, I've known you a long time, and I knew you when you said, you know what I'm going to do, and you meet a lot of people who say, you know what I'm going to do, and you say, well, good for them. Life is harder than they think. But you guys have done it.
Well, I appreciate that.
That's really special.
Yeah. Like I said, you were super, super kind to me when I moved to Nashville. The store I worked at, I fired the tech because your shop was around the corner, and it was embarrassing the tech we had. So I'd rather have no tech than have that person. And then I came over to your shop and you said, "Hey, can you just stop sending people here? They're busy. Can you just hire a tech?" So it's the shares.
We still do work for them. They still bring us stuff, and we have one great thing about Nashville is that everybody tends to have to play along with everybody, and so
It's a great community.
But the people, guys like Tony Higby and the different guys, that they know what to bring us and what to keep in house. And so it's wonderful because we're all as corny as it sounds, we're all working together, and we all know what somebody else is good at. That's what you end up doing with them. And
well, you when the flood happened there, and obviously the Keith Urbans and Brad Paces were affected, but a lot of the session guys, the guitars in their lockers were their retirement. Those instruments. And you called me and said, "Send your techs." And we sent our techs over, and y'all were in restoration mode, trying to save as many guitars as you could.
It did.
Yeah. Obviously it was some of the elites, but a lot of the working class guys, you guys helped save their guitars. It was really cool.
They were the ones that needed it. They didn't have insurance because they thought their guitars were safe in that facility.
Right.
And nobody needed them more because a day that they didn't have a guitar was a day they couldn't work.
Yeah.
That was 14 years ago today.
Really?
Yeah, because I was on the way back from Will Owsley's funeral. Vince Gill and Amy Grant, he'd worked in her band, and Vince, as super talented guy, and as Vince said, I inherited you, or whatever he said Owsley, but we were coming back from Owsley's funeral, and we were on the bus, and an aerial view of the flood of downtown by the river, down by where the Soundcheck Cartage place was, came on the TV, and George Groom was on the bus too, and we were looking at it. We knew there was a flood, we knew there was a problem, but everybody underplayed what was going on. Soundcheck was like, "Don't come down here, everything's okay," and you could see that it was underwater. And on the bus, I started talking. I said, "George, we got to do something about this." And George was like, "Well, do what we can, but I mean, we can help them get new guitars." I said, "No, all of us are going to have to mobilize and help." And I started making phone calls on that bus, and everybody said yes. You guys said yes. Vince Canetto came in from St. Louis. Everybody said yes.
It's a big town, but it's a tight community, and so I was only there every time, 5 years, but it was a privilege. You welcomed me to it. The community, it's a cool town. So
great place.
It was good to be. So
yeah,
thanks for coming down again, man.
Great to see you guys.